It was a tough year for the Florida Gators. Firing Billy Napier seemed inevitable at a certain point, and now they're looking forward to what is going to be the Jon Sumrall era. But we're going to look back at the 2025 season because there were some good things with this season. Not a ton, but there were some things that, if you look forward to the future, there are some things that are exciting surrounding this program. You look at this year, a 4-8 season, not great. You look at what they've had in the past, it's been a struggle. 8-5 in 2024, 5-7 in 2023, 6-7 in 2022. They haven't had a winning record in those 4 years in conference play, and that is something that needs to change. You need to be able to compete for SEC championships if you're the Florida Gators. Now, things did not get off to a good start. You knew kind of this was not headed in the right direction when you look at what they did early in the season. 0-3 in September wasn't going to do anybody any good. And then they obviously finished the year in November 1-4. The offense struggled mightily. Now, there are a number of different things that we'll dive into, but 21.6 points per game just isn't going to get the job done. There's too much talent on this roster, especially on the offense, to struggle that much. When you look at what they did in each game, the second and the fourth quarters were not good. The end of the halves were where Florida really struggled. They got outscored 80-104 in the second quarter this year, 44-82 in the fourth quarter. Now, granted, there were plenty of games where they were not in those games, so that probably contributed to it. But there were some games that we'll talk about on the schedule here in a little bit that did keep them at least interested, or at least they were in those games. Now, the defense we'll talk about as well. This is a defense that kept them in as many games as they could. Ultimately didn't work out, but that was a defense that, if you're going to give someone credit, this defense deserves a lot of that credit. Now, when you look at the offense, Jayden Baugh was really the big star of this offense, at least consistently. You've had some other players like Vernell Brown, Dallas Wilson. Those guys stepped up and had their moments, but a number of different things kind of contributed to their inconsistent play. The rushing attack was, I think, that the highlight at times. Jayden Baugh runs with an incredible tenacity. He runs hard, and he's a physical player that's tough to tackle. And you saw that a number of times this year. Over 1,100 yards for him, 8 touchdowns, averaged 5.3 yards per carry. He also was a factor in the passing attack as well. 33 catches for 210 yards and 2 touchdowns. We thought this offense had potential coming into this year. And I talked about how if certain things happened, this offense could be great. And we saw flashes of that. I don't want that to get lost in what was a season full of struggles. The offense showed flashes of how dangerous it could be. It's just that DJ Lagway did not have the season that he needed to have for Florida to be successful. The injury concerns started even before the season began. The preseason was full of DJ Lagway's dealing with this injury. Well into the season too, DJ Lagway's dealing with this. It felt like every week was kind of flavor of the month in terms of injuries, unfortunately. But we did see some good things from him. The talent is still there. I don't want people to forget the talent is still there. It's just the consistency was not. 2,264 yards, 16 touchdowns, 14 picks. That's not going to get the job done. In fact, even Tremel Jones was able to take over because Lagway was struggling, whether it was to stay on the field or just consistency, and the passing attack just didn't have the juice that we thought it might have. The rushing attack kind of carried them for a little bit, and it really was only one guy. Lagway did not have the numbers that we expected. There wasn't really a consistent second running back, so overall, the one true highlight continues to be Jayden Baugh in this offense. The passing attack, though, we saw flashes. Vernell Brown and Dallas Wilson are two tremendous players that have great futures ahead of them. You just need to see them more consistently. Brown was kind of the player that a lot of people forgot about and really didn't talk about coming into this season. We didn't expect him to have a huge role in this offense, and he led the team with 40 catches for 512 yards. We thought that J. Michael Sturdivant, Eugene Wilson would play huge roles. We also expected Dallas Wilson to play a massive role in this offense. Now, injuries also affected his game. So you saw some glimpses of what he could do. But the problem was he only played in 4 games and then ultimately decides to sit out. Now, his future is up for debate whether or not he's going to be with Florida in the future, but that's not what we're here to discuss. Dallas Wilson, when he played, though, you saw the greatness in him. You saw the size. You saw the explosive playmaking ability. He is a guy who has a bright future. You just have to find ways to get him the football more. If he comes back to Florida, that has to be a focal point, on top of somehow figuring out a way to keep Lagway and Dallas Wilson on the field is going to be the biggest challenge for Jon Sumrall and his staff if they do come back. Transfer portal is still going to be an option for everybody on this roster, so we will see. But Vernell Brown stepping up in a big way was great. It was fun to watch him play, and it was easily one of the more surprising things that we saw from the Florida Gators in 2025. J. Michael Sturdivant, he was all right. 27 catches, 406 yards, 3 touchdowns. Hayden Hansen was a guy that stepped up for them as well. 30 catches, 254 yards, 2 touchdowns. So his numbers aren't exactly crazy, but he at least gave them something they didn't anticipate coming into this year, at least that much. Eugene Wilson dealing with injuries, which is kind of now a theme with this offense. Coming into the year, it seemed like he was healthy, just didn't have the year that I think a lot of people expected. The wide receiver depth overall kind of took a hit. You saw some guys make some plays here and there, but overall it was just not a great experience offensively. And that's a big reason why they struggled. You didn't see the consistent play. You didn't see the consistent health. That was something that's always going to affect any team, no matter who you are. But the defense did its part. The defense played as hard as it could for as long as it could. And there were games where Florida was, I think, in position to win because of the defense. The defense played hard. And this is a group that, for the most part, until the end of the year, did not quit. They knew the offense was struggling. They knew that this season wasn't going the way that they wanted, but they continued playing at a high level. And the defensive line kind of went through a little bit of a rotation, a little bit of, we don't really know who's going to be the guy, but we do know we have plenty of talent. And you saw plenty of those players step up in a big way. Who those star players were, though, it kind of was a rotation. You saw guys take their turns. So when we talk about Tyreek Sapp and George Gums coming into the year, they had their moments. But you also saw other players step up when you needed. Brendan Bett had his moments this year too. You saw guys like Brian Taylor Jr. had games where they took over. This is a group that was very deep. Mekhi Barrow is another guy to keep an eye on. When we were coming into this season, you knew that this group had some depth. We just didn't know how much. And while their numbers don't maybe scream that they were the most disruptive, this is a group that had a huge impact on the game. They created a lot of pressure. They created a lot of quarterbacks that needed to escape the pocket. I thought this was a very fun group to watch, a tenacious group, a disruptive group, and they were a big reason for the success. If you have good players up front, you're most likely going to see some success on the backside as well. And the defensive line played a huge role in this team's success. Now, the linebacker position was kind of, I think it had, we knew Myles Graham was going to be a big part of this, but you also saw other guys step up as well. Aaron Childs had a pretty impressive year statistically when we didn't really expect a ton from him coming into the year. So that was really nice to see. Jadari Robinson, kind of the same thing. So we knew that Myles Graham was going to be the guy, and he was the leader. 76 tackles, 7 tackles for loss, 2 sacks. He was the leader of that group, and he got other guys to step up in a way that helped this defense, maybe not to the level they needed to reach that elite status, but at least to get some depth. The defensive line playing the way that it did was a huge reason why they had success and why the linebackers didn't have to necessarily do as much. The secondary also benefited from that. And we knew guys like Bryce Thornton and Jordan Castell were going to be big parts of the defense. The one thing we had in terms of questions was how much were they going to have to do in terms of run support, in terms of making tackles for this defense? Because we've seen Thornton and Castell with huge numbers in tackles, and that's not something you want to see consistently. So the fact that Thornton had 56 and Castell had 54 tells you kind of what that front group was doing this year. We also saw certain guys flash at times in terms of what they could do. Sharif Denson is a fiery player that plays with a chip on his shoulder. He had some good moments. Devin Moore led the team, or tied for the team lead with Castell with 2 interceptions. Cormani McLean flashed his greatness as well. We saw moments where this group was a major problem. And again, that defensive line deserves a lot of credit for what they did, but this is a secondary that also did its part, that also played fairly well in certain games. Now, again, when the defense has to do so much, the numbers might be a little bit misleading because the defense, again, was just carrying the team so much. But when you look at the teams that they faced, they had a number of games where they just kept competing and kept fighting, and maybe the numbers don't necessarily add up to the performance that you expected, but this is a defense that did a lot of good things this year. And when you have Jon Sumrall coming in, that's going to be exciting. The defense should elevate even more next year because Sumrall is that defensive mind. You look at what he's done at Troy and Tulane, you're going to see what this defense could potentially do in 2026 and beyond. Recruiting is going to be part of it. We're not here to talk about recruiting. We're talking about what this team did this year. And when you look at the schedule, things got off to a rough start. And we knew that this was going to be a tough schedule. We knew that this was going to be a challenge. This is one of the tougher schedules in college football. Now, obviously, you start with your bye week in LIU, you win 55-0. That's expected. But also the thing with that is you saw an offense that made some explosive plays that made people think, okay, well, they're clearly headed towards the right direction. That quickly derailed. The loss to USF was ultimately the nail in the coffin. It was just a longer, drawn out firing process, but losing to USF was not ever going to be easy to overcome. The fact that they lost to USF, which don't get me wrong, the Bulls were a good team this year, but Florida should never be losing to USF. They should never be losing that game. And that didn't really help them going forward. Losing to LSU and Miami, not really surprising. But again, when you're looking at these scores, it's clear which side of the ball is thriving and which side of the ball is struggling. The defense kept them in these games and gave them a chance to win. That is something that you just have to take advantage of if you're the offense. They just didn't. Only putting up 10 points against LSU and 7 against Miami. Don't get me wrong, those are 2 very good defenses, but just need more, plain and simple. The surprising win against Texas is, we'll see what happens with Texas in the playoff, but that might be what keeps them out. That was a surprising win. So that was maybe, okay, we're seeing this team turn things around potentially, but there were still major concerns with the offense going forward. So there wasn't a ton of optimism. The loss to Texas A&M, not really a surprise. The Aggies were a very good team this year, and that was a game where it was kind of close early, and then Texas A&M pulls away late. Then you knew they were in trouble when Mississippi State was a 23-21 win. That was a game where Mississippi State gave them all they could and just came up a little bit short. And again, another game that Florida should never be in that situation. Close game against Georgia. That's a rivalry game, so at least you saw some fight. But again, we are seeing the defense continue to compete at a high level. And unfortunately, it felt like that was kind of the end of that effort level. They kind of gave everything they had and they just ran out of juice. They ran out, the tank went empty, because then you get stomped by Kentucky 38-7. You lose to Ole Miss 34-24. Again, you were at least competitive, but still 34 points. Lose to Tennessee 31-11. You do get a win against Florida State, 40-21 to end the year, so at least that's something. But Billy Napier obviously has gone well before that. It was a disappointing season, but there is room for optimism. You look at some of the things that they could potentially do for 2026 and beyond, there's still room to be optimistic if you're a Florida Gators fan. If Jon Sumrall can find ways to develop certain players, keep certain players on the field, like DJ Lagway, like Dallas Wilson, bring in the right talent to be able to elevate whatever he needs to elevate within this program, this is a team that can compete for SEC championships again. 2025, not a great year. It was obviously disappointing, but there is room to be excited for this team going into the future.